watching World News program live from Algiers. The headlines. New horrific massacres carried out by the Israeli occupation in Gaza leave scores of martyrs. The health ministry in the Strip warns that patients face mass death within hours. Meanwhile, Italy condemns the attack on the Solidarity flotilla and announces it will send a ship to provide assistance. At the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly, Algeria consolidates its active diplomatic presence, strengthens coordination with its various partners, and presents its reform-oriented approaches, and also calls for enhanced peace and security in Africa. Next, in Sudan, deaths and injuries are reported after a rapid support forces strike on a market in El Fasher. The army says it targeted the strategic enemy positions in El Fasher and North Kordofan, while the WHO warns that the siege of El Fasher is worsening famine. And Zelensky stresses the need for increased pressure and sanctions on Russia. Kremlin responds to Trump's remarks, asserting that the war in Ukraine is proceeding in Russia's favor, while Rubio says Washington has options to impose further sanctions on Moscow. The details of your program first. Scores of Palestinians were martyred and others injured by Zionist occupation fire that targeted civilians in various areas of the Gaza Strip since dawn on Wednesday. This comes amid the ongoing escalation of the occupation's intensified aerial and ground bombardment, including the demolition of residential buildings in the city. Zionist occupation forces on Wednesday committed a massacre against displaced civilians, claiming the lives of more than 20 Palestinians. Additionally, new demolitions of buildings were carried out in Gaza City. Local Palestinian sources reported that 22 Palestinians, including children, were killed in an airstrike by the occupation's warplanes targeting a building sheltering displaced people near the Firas market in Gaza City. Others were also wounded in the attack. At least 16 Palestinians were martyred and others injured as a result of an Israeli airstrike targeting gatherings of civilians in al-Nusayrat refugee camp in the central Gaza Strip. Medical sources in Gaza reported on Wednesday that Al-Auda hospital received the bodies of 16 martyrs, most of them dismembered following a Zionist airstrike that targeted a group of civilians in front of the Nujum Stadium gate, the market area of al-Nusayrat camp. The sources also confirmed that 17 others were injured with varying degrees of severity. The Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza warned on Wednesday of a mass death of patients in the Strip within hours due to hospitals shutting down. The ministry's director general said that some services at Al-Shifa Hospital, the largest in the Strip, had already stopped working due to a fuel shortage, adding that the situation in Gaza's hospitals is the worst ever. He explained that medical staff have been able to evacuate more than 100 patients in intensive care units, issuing a final appeal to save the patients and urgently allow fuel into Gaza. Ten Palestinians were killed and others wounded on Wednesday morning when Israeli forces targeted civilians in the city of Rafah in southern Gaza. Palestinian media outlets reported that Israeli forces opened fire on people waiting for aid in the Al-Shakush area northwest of Rafah, killing 10 of them and injuring 6 others. And at least 10 ships from the Global Solidarity flotilla aiming to break the blockade on Gaza came under drone attacks on Wednesday, and explosions were heard, though the extent of damage to vessels or casualties has not been confirmed. For her part, UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in Palestine, Francesca Albanese said that 7 drone strikes targeted the flotilla's ships in the Mediterranean after 15 drones flew over several of the vessels heading toward Gaza to break the ongoing Israeli blockade on the Palestinian enclave. King Felipe VI of Spain said on Wednesday that his country cannot turn a blind eye to Israel's killing of civilians in Gaza, stressing that what is happening in the Strip is a shame to the international community. In a speech delivered before the 80th session of the UN General Assembly in New York, the Spanish monarch added the international community cannot remain silent or turn a blind eye to the destruction of schools and hospitals, the killing of civilians, and the starvation of the population in Gaza.
No podemos guardar silencio ni mirar hacia el otro lado.
We cannot remain silent or look the other way in the face of the devastation, the bombings, even of hospitals, schools, or places of refuge, faced with so many deaths among civilian population, or the famine and forced displacement of hundreds of thousands of people. With what end? These are abhorrent acts that are the antithesis of everything this forum represents. They repulse the human conscience and shame the entire international community.
Y avergüenzan al conjunto de la comunidad internacional.
Foreign ministers of the G7 countries, along with the EU representative or high representative, stressed the urgent need for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza to alleviate civilian suffering. Meeting on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York, the ministers underscored the importance of ensuring broad humanitarian aid access and securing the release of all hostages. They also expressed readiness to cooperate with Arab states on proposals for Gaza's reconstruction and the establishment of peace. Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf held bilateral meetings in New York on Wednesday with several European counterparts on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. In his meeting with Slovenian Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Tanja Fajon, both sides emphasized the importance of continued coordination during their terms on the Security Council, particularly within the group of elected members. They also discussed implementing the outcomes of President Abdelmajid Tebboun's state visit to Slovenia last May, including preparations for the first session of the Joint Governmental Committee. And in New York on Wednesday, Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf also met with Spanish Foreign Minister José Manuel Álvarez. On the occasion, both sides reviewed progress made in strengthening bilateral partnership between Algeria and Spain, particularly in economic and other priority areas. Same context, and in a bilateral meeting in New York on Wednesday, Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf and Dutch Foreign Minister David Van Wiel discussed the state of bilateral relations and ways to further strengthen them. The two ministers also addressed several regional issues of common interest. And Algerian Labour Minister Abdelhak Sayhi presented his country's approach to contributing to the reform of the global financial system and strengthening sustainable development in a speech at the first summit on sustainable international economy held alongside the 80th UN General Assembly. According to a ministry statement, Sayhi stressed under the chairmanship of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres that Algeria's approach reflects its firm commitment to supporting collective efforts to build a more balanced and equitable global economic system that serves all nations and promotes peace and stability.
This is the approach that Algeria, along with all developing countries, believes in to achieve a world that is fairer, more equitable, and more sustainable. An approach based first on rebuilding bridges of trust between the North and the South. Second, on addressing structural and global economic disparities through the establishment of a comprehensive economic wisdom that ensures the participation of developing countries in shaping global economic decision-making. And third and finally, on implementing all international commitment to support sustainable development, commitment to financing development, commitment to addressing the debt crisis, commitment to ensuring climate justice, and commitment to strengthening good governance.
والتزامات تعزيز الحوكمة الرشيدة.
And the Algerian Foreign Minister Ahmed Attaf called for effective African joint action to establish mechanisms that ensure peace and security on the continent. Speaking at the African Peace and Security Council Summit on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, he emphasized the need for awareness of the growing threats undermining Africa's stability amid recent developments.
At a time when these challenges are growing bigger, our continental diplomatic response has grown weaker. Mediation efforts and peace processes have not kept pace with the worsening situation, thus leaving a huge vacuum of forces of instability to spread and to expand even more. Having said that, we also need to be mindful of the responsibility that lies upon us, the member states. Our responsibility is to work together to put in place the appropriate mechanisms to provide the needed resources and to ensure the implementation of what has been agreed. In this regard, I would like to share a few reflections with this esteemed gathering.
The head of the Algerian diplomacy also emphasized that the African peace and security architecture has not yet been fully operational in the absence of an early warning system and an African standby force.
As we contemplate to embark on a new reform process that will target the African peace and security architecture, we should not forget that this architecture is yet to be fully operationalized. When the Peace and Security Council is working hard to achieve its utmost potential, two other major components of APSA are yet to be fully implemented. These two components, which are the early warning system and the African standby force, are of critical importance for both conflict prevention and conflict resolution.
The Algerian State Minister of Foreign Affairs Ahmed Attaf reaffirmed Algeria's commitment to advancing digital transformation across the African continent during a high-level address at the United Nations. Attaf stressed that Africa fully recognizes the magnitude of the challenges and stakes posed by the global AI revolution and is striving not to be left behind.
وإذ تواصل بلادي العمل على تجسيد استراتيجيتها الوطنية.
As my country continues to implement its national strategies in the field of digital transformation, it is fully committed to contributing, even if modestly, to address the challenges facing the African continent in this area. The continent is fully aware of the magnitude of the challenges and stakes linked to the technological and digital revolutions that the world is witnessing today. Africa is making its utmost effort not to be left behind by these revolutions and not to miss out on them as it previously missed out on the industrial and informational revolutions due to colonization, its legacy, and its remnants.
Algerian Minister of Foreign Affairs Ahmed Attaf held bilateral meetings with the foreign ministers of several brotherly and friendly countries on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly's high-level segment. According to a statement from the Algerian Foreign Ministry, Attaf met with Mohammed Salim Ould Merzoug, Foreign Minister of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, Abdul Latif bin Rashid Al Zayani, Foreign Minister of the Kingdom of Bahrain, and Tahar Baour, the Libyan Minister in charge of managing the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. He also met with Moundaya Sitmaya Kumba, Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of the Republic of South Sudan, as well as Konstantinos Kombos, Foreign Minister of the Republic of Cyprus. And in other news, several Sudanese civilians were killed. You have followed in our top stories, and others injured in an attack by the Rapid Support Forces on a crowded local market in Al Fashir, North Darfur. In a statement on Wednesday, the Al Fashir Resistance Committee said that the RSF carried out a drone strike on a market in the city, killing and wounding more than 27 civilians. The statement added that this attack is part of an endless series of systematic and escalating massacres carried out by the RSF against Al Fashir for about a year and a half. The Sudanese army announced that its forces had struck what it described as strategic positions of the Rapid Support Forces in Al Fashir, North Darfur, and in North Kordofan. Speaking to Al-24 News, army sources said that the Sudanese armed forces used drones to target RSF gatherings and positions around the Zemzem displacement camp in Al Fashir and the Kabshnur area north of Jabra Sheikh in North Kordofan, confirming direct hits on RSF forces. The World Health Organization said that insecurity and the blockade imposed on Al Fashir in southern Sudan have worsened hunger and increased the spread of diseases and epidemics among residents trapped in the city. In a post on X on Wednesday, WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom stressed the urgent need to ensure safe, immediate, and unhindered access for humanitarian aid to Al Fashir to save civilian lives. He affirmed that peace is the most effective remedy, urging the international community to act immediately to stop what he called a humanitarian catastrophe. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged for more sanctions on the Russian Federation, as well as more pressure to end the war in Ukraine. In a meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump, Zelensky stated that his country needs more pressure and more sanctions, hoping to discuss the issue with the U.S. first of all, and then the European bloc.
Well, with this, during this war, we need more pressure and more sanctions. And I hope with United States, first of all, and Europe, but we support, Mr. President, your idea, and I want to discuss it, how to stop some countries from Europe, how to stop the possibility to buy Russian oil and gas.
U.S. President Donald Trump appeared to raise his support for Ukraine, declaring on social media that Ukraine can win back its entire occupied territory in its original form and maybe even go further than that. Trump said multiple times on Tuesday while meeting with world leaders at the UN that Russia's performance in Ukraine is not distinguished. On social media, he argued that Moscow's failure to gain more territory in Ukraine over more than 3 years is very much making them look like a paper tiger.
Russia has been fighting aimlessly for 3.5 years, a war that should have taken a real military power less than a week to win. This is not distinguishing Russia. In fact, it is very much making them look like a paper tiger.
And Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov affirmed that the war in Ukraine is proceeding in favor of the Russian army, which he said is advancing militarily with great caution to reduce losses and avoid undermining its capabilities. In response to remarks by U.S. President Donald Trump, Peskov told reporters that Russian military operations in Ukraine are highly calculated, stressing that it is better to take more time in order to avoid a higher death toll.
According to our understanding, President Trump's remarks came after his contact with President Zelensky, and it is clear they are influenced by the vision presented by Zelensky. That vision is completely different from our understanding of the current situation. Russia's gradual advance in Ukraine is the result of a well-devised strategy. We are advancing with great caution to minimize losses and avoid undermining our offensive capabilities.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said on Tuesday that Russia's failure to advance the peace process in Ukraine has prompted U.S. President Donald Trump to reconsider his approach to Moscow. Rubio noted that Trump had shown extraordinary patience in hopes of achieving a diplomatic breakthrough. Rubio further stated that the U.S. is also now monitoring incursions into neighboring airspace, both by drones and manned aircraft.
The president is a very patient man. He's very committed to peace, but his patience is not infinite. And as he has said repeatedly, he has before him the opportunity and the options of imposing additional economic costs on the Russian Federation if necessary in order to bring this to an end. He also has before him the option, as he has already chosen to do in some circumstances, to sell defensive weaponry and potentially offensive weaponry so that Ukraine can defend itself from this assault by purchasing that weaponry.
Algeria expressed its regret over the ongoing war in Ukraine, affirming its support for all diplomatic initiatives and efforts to end the war through dialogue and negotiation. In his speech during the UN Security Council meeting on the war in Ukraine, Algerian Minister of State and Minister of Foreign Affairs Ahmed Attaf emphasized the need to resume and strengthen these initiatives and efforts in order to close all doors to any signs of escalation.
Today, more than ever before, we are convinced that there is no alternative but to resume these initiatives and efforts, and even to strengthen their impact and scope, in order to close all doors to signs of escalation and the possibility of expanding the scope of conflict in the region, with all the worrying consequences and grave repercussions that such prospects carry. The significant divergence in the positions of the two parties on many fundamental points should never prevent us from endeavoring to close divisions together, curb divisions, and find a common and a consensual platform that restores hope for a better future for the two neighboring countries, and a better future for the European continent, and a better future for the entire world.
In the same context, the Algerian Minister of State and Minister of Foreign Affairs affirmed that speaking about the Russian-Ukrainian war refers to a conflict in which everyone is harmed and stands to lose.
Algeria firmly believes that when we speak about the Russian-Ukrainian war, we are speaking about a conflict in which everyone is harmed and no one is advantageous. Everyone is a loser and no one is a winner. Everyone bears a significant share of the consequences that threaten Europe and the entire world. Day by day, we are increasingly convinced that ending this war not only safeguards the interests of the parties at issue, but also falls within the essence of what is known as the international common interests.
And France is bracing for another day of protests on October the 2nd. The third in recent weeks and the second since Sébastien Lecornu became Prime Minister, still without a government. The Union Federation said Lecornu has failed to win them over, and another wave of mobilization is expected. Osama Aidi has the report.
As the political crisis deepens in France, a new national mobilization could take place on October the 2nd at the call of several labor unions. This date is expected to be confirmed following the meeting of Inter-Union Council that has pushed for more mobilization in the country as part of the efforts to show total refusal of the population for the current policies in France. This strike day comes amid a particularly tense social climate marked by growing distrust of the government. According to union leaders, the Prime Minister has offered no response to their demands, further fueling the anger of the mobilizing organizations.
The Prime Minister did not provide any clear answers to the workers' demands. We wanted a copy of the initial draft budgets, PLF and PLFSS. which we did not receive. Therefore, for the inter-union movement, this was a missed opportunity. Things are not going according to plan. So we stated that if we don't receive a clear response, a new strike and mobilization date will be October 2nd.
Donc le 2 octobre.
In a context of rising social and political tensions, the unions denounce a loss of democratic legitimacy. According to these organizations, the head of state is now incapable of meeting the country's expectations. As it is noteworthy that the strike is threatening to further weaken the already fragile political scene in France amidst large protests in the country that are pushing for paralysis on several levels.
Dans un premier temps, le peuple réclame massivement des conditions.
First of all, the people are massively protesting against the poor living conditions, which the government has failed to address. The first consequence was the downfall of the François Bayrou, and the present response was to appoint the last remaining Macron supporter on his team, namely Sébastien Lecornu. This person then decided to meet with the unions. But I won't comment on that. Regarding the unions, all I know is that the inter-union body needs to meet, and in any case, we will support the protests. But at the same time, as we've heard from many French citizens, what they are primarily concerned about is the person responsible for this chaos, namely the departure of Emmanuel Macron.
The planned mobilization aims to defend social rights, public freedoms, and demand an immediate change of government. It would follow two large successful demonstrations organized earlier this month. For the unions, the goal is to maintain pressure on the government that they consider deaf to their demands.
And that's a wrap for tonight's program. Thanks for following, and bye-bye for now.